Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudire Nashtivraeshu Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttam Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Neshtiki. So continuing with the discussion on Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 11, Chapter 10, the nature of fruitive activity, text 22 onwards. So Krishna is further speaking to Uddhavji. Antarayar vihito yadi dharma svanushtita tenapi nirjitam sthanam yatha gacchati tatshanam. If one performs Vedic sacrifices and fruitive rituals without any mistake or contamination, one will achieve a heavenly situation in the next life. But even this result, which is only achieved by perfect performance of fruitive rituals, will be vanquished by time. Now hear of this. So even in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, after exhausting the bank balance of pious activities, the jiva falls down, mrityu samsara world. Falls down on the earthly planet from heavenly planets. The word gacchati means going. In the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna states, agam apaino nitya. All material experiences, good or bad, come and go. Therefore, the word gacchati refers to the disappearance of the results of even the most meticulously performed fruitive sacrifices. Any material situation, from the worst to the best, is imperfect. Thus, one should strive only for pure Krishna consciousness. So any material situation, no matter what we have done in the material world, ultimately the result is zero. Even if somebody goes to highest planet, if he hasn't done bhakti to go to the spiritual world, he has to come down and start over. Then what's the point? That's what it says. It's a wastage of time. Ishtave devata yagya swaralokam yati yagika bunjita deva tatra bhogan divya nircharjitan. If on earth one performs sacrifices for the satisfaction of the demigods, he goes to the heavenly planets where, just like a demigod, he enjoys all of the heavenly pleasures he has earned by his performances. Which is, yes, that is true. Krishna also said, Devan, those who worship demigod, they go to their planet. Those who worship Pitras, they go to their planets. But those who worship me, come to me. Swapunyopachite shubhre viman upagiyate gandharvaira viharan madhye devinam hridaveshadrik. Having achieved the heavenly planets, the performer of the ritualistic sacrifices travels in a glowing airplane, which he obtains as a result of his piety on earth. Being glorified by songs sung by the Gandharvas and dressed in wonderfully charming clothes, he enjoyed life surrounded by heavenly goddesses. Istri bhikam gayanena kinkani jala malina kridanna vedatma patham sura krideshu nirvritaha. Accompanied by heavenly women, the enjoyer of the fruits of sacrifice goes on pleasure rides in a wonderful airplane, which is decorated with circles of tingling bells and which flies wherever he desires. So he doesn't need any passport, any visa, any ticket. And the airplane is not an ordinary airplane, just like here we have with all the fumes and everything. No, it's a wonderful airplane. Being relaxed, comfortable, and happy in the heavenly pleasure gardens, he does not consider that he is exhausting the fruits of his piety and will soon fall down to the mortal world. Mortal world. Although the heavenly planets also, one dies, but mrityu, martilok is this earth. That is considered Martilok. Tavat samodate swarge, yavat punyam samapyate, kshina punyam, patati arvag, anichan kala chalita. Until his pious results are used up, the performer of sacrifice enjoys life in the heavenly planets. When the pious results are exhausted, however, he falls down from the pleasure gardens of heaven, being moved against his desire by the force of eternal time. The time and tide waits for no one. So kshine punya marte lokam vishanti. So once his pious bank balance of pious results are gone, it comes down. Just like in government jobs, they give TADA every year or whatever one can accumulate. And one takes his family for a nice trip, maybe from Delhi, goes to South India and then enjoys. But once the money is gone, once the vacation time is over, he has to come back to the grind and get to the job again. So the same thing is here. Yadyad dharma ratah sangat astam vajitendriya kamatma kripano lubdha strano bhut vihinsika pashun vidhi na labdhya pret bhut ganani yajan narakan vasho jantur gatva yatulya banam tamah karmani dukhodarkani kurvan dehen tah punah dehama bhajate tatra kim sukham marte dharmina. If a human being is engaged in sinful, irreligious activities, either because of bad association or because of his failure to control his senses, then such a person will certainly develop a personality full of material desires. He thus becomes miserly towards others, greedy, and always anxious to exploit the bodies of women. When the mind is so polluted, one becomes violent and aggressive, and without the authority of Vedic injunctions, slaughters innocent animals for sense gratification. Worshipping ghosts and spirits, the bewildered person falls fully into the grip of unauthorized activities and thus goes to hell, where he receives a material body infected by the darkest modes of nature. In such a degraded body, he unfortunately continues to perform inauspicious activities that greatly increase his future unhappiness, and therefore he again accepts a similar material body. What possible happiness can there be for one who engages in activities inevitably terminating in death? This is material world. This is the analysis of now one who goes to hell. What happens? In the Vedic analysis of civilized life, there are two paths. One who takes to the path of Nivritti Marg immediately renounces material sense gratification and purifies his existence by performance of austerity and devotional activities. On the path of Pravritti Marg, one furnishes a steady supply of sense objects to the senses, but one consumes such sense objects under strict regulations and through ritualistic ceremonies, thus gradually purifying the heart and satiating the material senses. Unfortunately, as explained in these verses and the previous verse, the path of Pravritti Marg is extremely volatile, because rather than becoming detached, the living entity often becomes uncontrolled and fully addicted to further sense gratification. In the previous verse, the path of regulated, authorized sense gratification is described, and in these verses, the path of unauthorized, demoniac sense gratification is described. But regardless, both are bad. So in this verse, the words Sangad, Asatam, Vajitendriya are very significant. One may fall down into sinful life by bad association, or even in good association, one may fail to control his senses. Ultimately, each living entity is responsible for his existential situation. The word adharma rata in this verse indicates those engaged in excessive sex life, meat eating, drinking, and other inauspicious activities that transgress the codes of civilized human life. Being in the mode of ignorance, these persons develop such a cruel mentality that they do not consider any festive occasion complete without the consumption of large quantities of meat obtained by slaughtering helpless animals. And it's everywhere, all over the world. Eventually, such persons become influenced by ghosts and spirits who deprive them of all ability to discriminate between right and wrong. Losing all sense of decency, they become fit candidates for entrance into the darkest modes of material existence. Sometimes these lusty, intoxicated carnivores, considering themselves pious, pray to God in a useless way. Afflicted by innumerable material desires, they rotate from one material body to another without experiencing true happiness. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur has noted that material life is so disturbing that even if one is allowed to live for an entire day of Brahma, which is approximately 86.4 billion years, one will eventually be afflicted by the fear of death. In fact, Brahmaji himself is disturbed by fear of death, what to speak of tiny human beings who live in a paltry 70 or 80 years at the most. Thus, as stated here, Kim Sukham Martya Dharvina. What possible happiness can one find within the painful grip of material illusion? And this is the illusion, Maya. What kind of happiness we can find here? Lokanam lokapalanam madbhayam kalpajivinam brahmano api bhayam matto dviparartha parayusha. In all the planetary systems, from the heavenly to the hellish, and for all of the great demigods who live for 1,000 yuga cycles, there is fear of me in the form of time. Even Brahma, who possesses a supreme lifespan, his lifespan is 311 trillion 40 billion years, according to our time cycle. According to his cycle, it's 100 years. So even Brahmaji is also afraid of me in the form of time. There are many statements throughout Vedic literature proving that even the great demigods fear the time potency of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Even in the heavenly planets, there is no relief from the miseries of material life. No conditioned soul can live eternally. Wait a second. So no conditioned soul can live eternally, as clearly demonstrated by the deaths of Hiranyakashipu and other demons. Since even the demigods fear the time potency of the personality of God, one may easily conclude that Krishna is the absolute truth and that he is eternally the supreme controller of everything and everyone. Lord Krishna is the only real shelter. But this is what illusion is. We forget. We don't want to even think of the next life or death or anything else. Oh, I can live forever. But we can clearly see nobody can live forever, and nobody can be happy forever. No way. Even the great warriors who are there, great kings, great leaders, they all are dead, gone. Where is Napoleon and Sikandar and Hitler and so many others? Where are they? And similarly, whoever the leaders now are, they will be dead sooner or later. Guna srijanti karmani, guno anusrijate gunan, jivastu guna samyukto, bhunkte karma phalanyaso. The material senses create material activities, either pious or sinful, and the modes of nature set the material senses into motion. The living entity, being fully engaged by the material senses and modes of nature, experiences the various results fruitive work. The living entity, being fully engaged by the material senses and modes of nature, experiences the various results. Although a living entity is beyond all this, but still, because we are identifying with our body, we have to go through the pious and sinful reactions. So previous verse, it is explained the living entity under the control of fruitive activities is pushed down into the hellish condition of life. In this verse, the exact nature of the living entity's dependence on fruitive activities is described. One can observe that one's activities are performed by the material senses and that the living entity himself is merely conscious of such activities. One may be worshipping the demigods, enjoying sex, or performing agricultural or intellectual activities, but in all cases, the material senses are performing the work. One may argue that the spirit soul initiates the activities of the senses and that thus is the ultimate doer. But such false egotism is negated in this verse by the statements guna srijanti karmani guno anusrajate guna. The three modes of nature, goodness, passion, and ignorance, stimulate the functions of the material senses, and the living entity coming under the control of a particular mode of nature merely experiences the good and bad results of his work. Prakrite kriyamanani gune karmani sarvesham. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita. This does not negate the concept of free will, since the living entity chooses to associate with different modes of nature. This just only independence we have is that we desire. After that, there is no independence. Then the modes of nature take over, depending upon our bank balance of whatever activities, pious, negative, impious, and then we work accordingly. This is how the matrix of material creation works. We are so bound. We think we are free. I don't see my shackles, but we are bound by the three modes of nature. By one's eating, speaking, sexual activities, occupation, etc., one associates with various modes of nature and acquires a particular mentality. But in all cases, the modes of nature themselves are acting, not the living entity. The word aso in this verse indicates that the living entity falsely considers himself to be the performer of work carried out by nature. So the shloka is stated in Bhagavad Gita, Prakriti Kriyamana. The bewildered spirit soul, under the influence of the three modes of material nature, thinks himself to be the doer of activities which are in actuality carried out by nature. The conditioned soul can be liberated simply by giving up this false, egoistic conception of life and taking to the devotional service of the Lord, by which the living entity or marginal potency of the Supreme Personality of God escapes the disturbing influence of the external potency called Maya. In the devotional service of the Lord, the liberated entity realizes his actual form of eternity, knowledge, and bliss. So this is a real form, actual form, original form, constitutional position. But we have forgotten all this. The living entity is by nature blissful, and when his illusion ceases, all suffering comes to an end. The liberated soul is then fit to reside in Vaikuntha, the kingdom of God. Yavat syat gun vaishamyam tavan nanatvam atmano yavat paratantrayam tadavahi. As long as the living entity thinks that the modes of material nature have separate existences, he will be obliged to take birth in many different forms and will experience varieties of material existence. Therefore, the living entity remains completely dependent on fruitive activities under the modes of nature. So that's how we just keep on taking birth in the material bodies. The word gun vaishamyam indicates forgetfulness of Lord Krishna, which causes one to see material varieties as separate states of existence. The living entity, being attracted to material varieties and having faith in them, is forced to experience these varieties in different material bodies, such as those of demigods, pigs, businessmen, insects, and so on. According to Karma Mimamsa philosophers, there is no transcendental living entity who is the background of all existence. They accept material variety as a final reality. However, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Krishna, is the actual basis of everything. Everything is within him, and he is within everything. A pure devotee of the Lord sees Krishna everywhere and sees all of the variegated modes of nature as the potency of Lord Krishna. One who does not see Lord Krishna will certainly see material variegatedness as a supreme reality. Such vision is called Maya or gross illusion and is similar to the vision of an animal. So this is how we get stuck in the material body. Yavadasya swatantra tattvam tavadishvarato bhayam ya etat sampasirans te muyanti shucharpita. The conditioned soul who remains dependent on fruitive activities under the material modes of nature will continue to fear me, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, since I impose the results of one's fruitive activities. So whether they're afraid of Bhagwan, whether they're afraid of time factor, whether they're afraid of what they call the Vidhata, who gives the results, they're just afraid. Those who accept the material concept of life, taking the variegatedness of the modes of nature to be factual, devote themselves to material enjoyment and are therefore always absorbed in lamentation and grief. This is material world. Always absorbed, devote themselves to material enjoyment, but they're always absorbed in lamentation and grief. The living entity is bound in the network of illusion, but although he can understand that he is dependent upon superior powers, he does not want to serve the Supreme Lord. He thus becomes filled with fear of life itself, desiring material sense gratification. The living entity, like the demon Kansa, always fears destruction of his material arrangement. Remaining addicted to the flavors of material nature, one gradually sinks down into an irrational form of life. And this fear, especially the fear of death, fear of losing one's power position is so great, that if you really observe the lives of great leaders, so-called great leaders, they're the most fearful. Because they're afraid sooner or later somebody is going to come, kill me and take over my position, or defeat me and take over my position. So they somehow or other, by hook or crook, they want to cling on to their position, to their power. But sooner or later it is going to happen. If nobody else does, death will definitely take them away. What's the point? Committing so many sinful activities just to remain in power. Maya has two potencies. The first covers the living entity, that is Prikshaplita potency. And the second throws him down into a hellish condition of life. Avaranatmika and Prikshaplita. Avaranatmika means covers the living entity with illusion. And secondly, throws him down into a hellish condition of life. We think we are happy, we are enjoying. Actually, we are not. When one is covered by Maya, one loses all power of discrimination. Maya then throws such a fool into the darkness of ignorance. When one wrongly considers oneself to be independent of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Krishna, one becomes a worshipper of temporary material objects, hoping to enjoy material sense gratification. And as one grows older, one's life becomes filled with fear and anxiety. A conditioned soul considers himself to be in control of his life, but since he does not have any actual controlling potency, his situation is contradictory and not at all pleasing. As all of one's material possessions are taken away by time, one becomes filled with lamentation. All in all, material life is truly abominable, and it's only because of dense illusion that we accept it as satisfactory. So the chapter is the nature of fruitive activity or living in the material world, and it is horrible actually. Kala atma gamo loka subhavo dharma evacha iti mam bahuda prahur guna vyati kare sati. When there is agitation and interaction of the material modes of nature, the living entity then describe me in various ways, such as the all-powerful time, the self, Vedic knowledge, the universe, one's own nature, religious ceremonies, and so on. One can experience the potency of the personality of Godhead by observing how different species of life, demigods, human beings, animals, fish, birds, insects, plants, etc., gradually evolve their natures and activities. Each species of life executes a particular process of sense gratification. And this function is called the dharma of the species. Because they have no, the lower species especially, they don't have any control over their nature. Whatever their nature is, it just comes out. This is dharma. Lacking knowledge of the personality of Godhead, ordinary persons catch a glimpse of the Lord's potencies in the above mentioned manifestations. Srila Madhvacharya has cited following information from the Tantra Bhagavad. The Lord is called Kal or time because he is a mover and controller of all material qualities. Because he is complete and perfect, he is called Atma or self. He is a personification of all knowledge. The word Swabhav indicates the Lord fully controls his own destiny. And as a maintainer of everyone, he is called Dharma. One on the liberated platform can achieve unlimited bliss by worshipping the personality of Godhead, whereas those who are ignorant of the Lord try to find happiness by concocting other objects of worship. So this kind of ignorance and stubborn behavior, it just goes on in the material world. As soon as one considers anything to be independent of the Lord, one is immediately gripped by Lord's illusory network called Maya. So nothing is independent. Everything is controlled by the Lord. One should always remain humble and obedient to the personality of Godhead, even when one is liberated. And thus one will achieve the supreme spiritual happiness. There is no other way. So finally, after all these instructions, Shri Uddhava Vacha, Guneshu Vartamanopi Deha Jeshva Anapavritaha Gunarna Badhyate Dehi Badhyate Va Katham Vibho. Shri Uddhav said, "O my Lord, a living entity situated within the material body is surrounded by the modes of nature, and the happiness and distress that are born of activity is caused by these modes. How is it possible that he is not bound by this material encirclement? It may also be said that the living entity is ultimately transcendental and has nothing to do with the material world. Then how he is ever bound by material nature? Now, how do we come under the control of these material modes? Due to the influence of the modes of nature, the material body generates fruitive activities, which in turn generate material happiness and distress. So fruitive activities means karma, punya or pap karma. This material chain reaction is indicated by the word Dehajeshu. The personality of Godhead has shown Uddhav that the actual goal of life is liberation, not sense gratification. Although the Lord has indicated that the living entity is liberated by devotional service performed with knowledge and renunciation. Uddhav apparently does not understand the specific means of perfection. According to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, Uddhav's caution implies that we observe even in the activities of liberated souls such external activities as eating, sleeping, walking, hearing, speaking, etc., which are all functions of gross and subtle bodies. Thus, if even liberated souls are situated within the gross and subtle material bodies, then how are they not bound by the material modes of nature? If it is argued that the living entity is like the sky, which never mixes with any other object, and therefore it's not bound, then one may ask how such a transcendental living entity can ever be bound by material nature. How he comes in control with the control of the material modes, although he is spiritual. In other words, how would material existence be possible? So Uddhavji presents this question to Krishna. So no speculations here. Krishna himself will give the answers. Katham vartet viharet kairva gyayet lakshana kim bhunjitot visrijet chai tasit yativan etad achyut me bruhi prashnam vidam vara nitya baddho nitya mukta eka eveti me brahma. O my Lord Achyuta, the same living entity is sometimes described as eternally conditioned and at other times as eternally liberated. I'm not able to understand, therefore, the actual situation of the living entity. You, my Lord, are the best of those who are expert in answering philosophical questions. Please explain to me the symptoms by which one can tell the difference between a living entity who is eternally liberated and one who is eternally conditioned. In what various ways would they remain situated, enjoy life, eat, evacuate, lie down, sit, or move about? So similar question was asked by Arjun. What are the symptoms of this self-realized sthit pragya? How does he talk? How does he sit? How does he walk? And how does he speak? And what are his symptoms? Talk, sit, and walk. Uddhavji is gone beyond that. In the previous verses, Lord Krishna has explained to Uddhav that an eternally liberated soul is beyond the three modes of material nature. Since a liberated soul is considered to be beyond even the superior modes of goodness, how can he be recognized? By false identification with the modes of nature which produce one's own material body, one is bound by illusion. On the other hand, by transcending the modes of nature, one is liberated. However, in ordinary activities such as eating, evacuating, relaxing, sitting, and sleeping, a liberated soul and a conditioned soul appear to be the same. Therefore, Uddhav is inquiring, by what symptoms can I recognize that one living entity is performing such external activities without false ego and one who is working under the illusory bondage of material identification? Because from outwardly, they both look the same. How do we know who is who? How is one performing these activities? This is difficult because the ordinary worldly functions of liberated and conditioned personalities appear similar. Uddhava has approached the Supreme Personality of Godhead, taking him as his personal spiritual master, and wants to be enlightened about how to understand the differences between material and spiritual life. So this is an apparent contradiction which will be cleared up by Krishna himself. So thus ends the purport to 11th canto, 10th chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled The Nature of Fruitive Activity. Since we still have time, we can start the next chapter. Chapter 11, the symptoms of conditioned and liberated living entities. So, and explained by Krishna himself. So definitely it's very authorized, very genuine. Shri Bhagwan Vacha, Baddho Mukta iti Vyakhya, Gunato Mena Vastuta, Gunasya Maya Mulatva, Name Moksho Na Bandhanam. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, My dear Uddhava, due to the influence of the material modes of nature, which are under my control, the living entity is sometimes designated as conditioned and sometimes as liberated. In fact, however, the soul is never really bound up or liberated. Soul is always a soul. Soul cannot do anything to it. It's always spiritual, always transcendent. And since I am the Supreme Lord of Maya, which is the cause of the modes of nature, I also am never to be considered liberated or in bondage. So there goes all this Mayavadi philosophy given by Shankaracharya. He says, Krishna himself says, I am the Supreme Lord of Maya. I'm not under Maya. Mayavadi says, originally there is light and or nirvikar. Nirvikar means light, Brahmajyoti, and some change happens. Change is not the right word. I'm trying to find the right word. Something happened, and then all these different forms come into scene, Krishna and Ram. And we are also from the same eternal, absolute, unmanifested, impersonal. And when we become realized, we'll go back, we become liberated. So means we have come under Maya. Means Krishna is also under Maya. Here Krishna is clearly saying, I am the Supreme Lord of Maya, also never to be considered liberated or in bondage. I'm beyond that. And so is a spirit soul. Soul is not under Maya. It just gets covered over or bound up. In this chapter, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna explains the different characteristics of conditioned and liberated life, the symptoms by which one can recognize saintly persons, and the various processes of devotional service to the Lord. In the previous chapter, Uddhava inquired from the Lord how conditioned and liberated life are possible. The Lord now replies that Uddhava's question is somewhat superficial, since the pure spirit soul is never entangled in the material energy of the Lord. But we can say we all are entangled. So what happens here? The living entity imagines a false connection with the three modes of nature and accepts the material body as a self. Imagines a false connection. See, we are not this body. Prabhupada said so many times, Krishna has said in the beginning of Bhagavad Gita, but here he is going into more details. This is Uddhava Gita, so more details. The living entity therefore suffers the consequences of his own imagination, just as one suffers the illusory activities of a dream. This does not indicate that the material world is illusory in the sense that it is non-existent. The material world is certainly real, being the potency of the personality of Godhead, and the living entity, being the superior potency of God, is also real because we are part and parcel of Krishna himself. But the living entities dream of being part and parcel of the material world is an illusion that drags him into the contradictory state called material conditioned life. The living entity is never actually baddha or bound up, since he merely imagines a false connection with the material world. So this is our imagination only, like a dream state. in dream state because we are ignorant of our real position. Because there is ultimately no permanent connection between the living entity and matter. There is no actual liberation. The living entity, being eternally transcendental to the inferior material energy of the Lord, is eternally liberated. Lord Krishna reveals that in one sense, the living entity is factually not bound up and thus cannot be liberated. But in another sense, the terms bondage and liberation can be conveniently applied to indicate the particular situation of the individual soul, who is the marginal potency of the Lord. Although the individual soul is never actually bound to matter, he suffers the reactions of material nature because of false identification. And thus the term baddha or bound up may be used to indicate the nature of a living entity's experience within the inferior energy of the Lord. So this material energy is inferior energy, and living entities are we belong to the superior energy. But we have imagined this false identification. It's just like spirit, soul, and the material energy, material energy. There is no combination. It's just like oil and water. Oil never mixes with water. It's like that. But because of our imagination that I am this body, this connection has become as if somebody has put dye in water, blue color or red color in water. Cannot separate. That's how it has become. Therefore, the terms bondage and liberation are acceptable if one understands that such terms only refer to temporary situations created by illusion and do not refer to the ultimate nature of the living entity. In this verse, Krishna states, Gunasya Maya Mulatva Name Mokshuna Bandha. The terms liberation and bondage can never be applied to the Supreme Personality of God, since He is the absolute truth and the supreme controller of everything. Absolute truth means every reality is in Him, comes from Him. Nothing is beyond Him. Lord Krishna is eternally the supreme transcendental entity, and He can never be bound by illusion. It's the duty of the illusory potency of the personality of Godhead to attract the living entities to ignorance by creating the false impression of a blissful existence separate from Lord Krishna. The illusory conception of existence apart from the personality of Godhead is called Maya or material illusion. Since Lord Krishna is a supreme absolute controller of Maya, there is no possibility that Maya could have any influence over the personality of Godhead. Thus, the term bandhanam or bondage cannot be applied to the eternal, blissful, and omniscient personality of Godhead. So this Maya cannot attract, or Maya cannot influence Krishna. Although in the spiritual world, or when he comes and performs his pastimes, just like we'll study this Damodar Leela, beautiful Damodar Leela that happened in the month of Kartik. So Krishna was bound up. How can we say Krishna is not bound up? Krishna was bound up, not just bound up. He was crying, rubbing his eyes again and again, just mentioned in Damodar Ashtakam, out of fear. Yashoda Bhiyolu Kala Dhamma. He was fearful. He was not pretending to be afraid. He was actually afraid. So how can Supreme Lord be afraid of Mother Yashoda or stick in the hands of Mother Yashoda? So that fear was because he wanted to relish that pastime and he wanted Maya Yashoda to relish that pastime, and all the gopas who were watching, all the gopis who were watching. If he was acting, then he wouldn't have relished. That means he wasn't relishing. But he was relishing. He wanted to relish. So that's why he he orders Yogamaya to cover himself and cover everybody else. So they should not think he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So that is a different covering of Yogamaya, because that comes by the order of Krishna. The Mahamaya can never cover Krishna. It doesn't even come in contact with Krishna. When Krishna says, those who take shelter of me, they go beyond this Mahamaya, then how can Krishna come under the control of Mahamaya? No way. So this is what has been explained here. Although it's a long purport and covering many, many aspects. So we'll go to the last paragraph. In conclusion, it may be stated that the individual living entity is never actually entangled in matter and is thus not liberated, although his illusory state may be accurately described as entangled and liberated. On the other hand, the Supreme Personality of Godhead is eternally situated in his own spiritual potencies and can never be described as being bound up, and thus there is no meaning to the concept of the Lord's freeing himself from such a non-existent condition. So we, as spirit soul is part and parcel of Krishna, so never get entangled. But because of our imagination, thinking that I am this body, then because of that imagination, we get entangled. But the spirit soul, as in the constitutional form, it's never entangled. But we have forgotten that constitutional position. So a little too technical, too philosophical, but it's wonderful to learn all this, and so that we can make progress properly. That's the whole purpose of this knowledge. Okay, so I guess I can stop here. See anybody has any questions or comments? I guess it got too technical, huh?
Yes, Prabhuji.
We are deep diving, Prabhuji.
Prabhuji, एक चीज मुझे पूछनी है, because we just studied before that everything what we are experiencing in this world is all real, and here is saying it's all imagination. So I'm.
See, material world is real. It is temporary, but it is real. So what is imagination is me thinking I am this body. Body is real, but myself thinking that I am this body, and then all the activities, they are happening, but the soul is beyond all this.
But Prabhuji,
Does that make sense?
from
Yes,
morning to evening, we are just feeding the body with all the material around us. And actually, Krishna has put us in this world.
Do what?
See, why does Krishna not, right from the time we are born,
Mm-hmm.
us realizing that we are just souls?
First of all, about the body and the activities, it's just like in a dream. When we dream of some activities, are they real or imaginary? In a dream, sometimes tiger may come and kill us, or we are fighting with somebody. It's all a dream. So similarly, our existence in the material world is a dream state compared to the spiritual world. The real reality is there. This is only under ignorance. And now, why Krishna does not give us the knowledge right away and just take us back? Because first of all, we have rebelled against him in the spiritual world. We wanted to come here. So he allowed us, okay, you go. But so this place is for a rectification, not for permanent stay or we think we are enjoying here. That's not what it's for. He does not do it forcefully because he does not want to take away our independence. And he wants us to develop that love for him. And develop the desire to go back to the spiritual world. He doesn't want to create robots. That he has not created robots. That he pushes the button and this robot does this and that robot does that and goes like. Then there is the question of love. Love cannot be forced. Love has to come from within. But at the same time, he comes, performs his pastime, sends his representatives, sends his scriptures. So we learn and we come to the right understanding. Is it okay?
Yes.
Thank you, Vanda.
Prabhuji, another thing. If it's all imaginations, जैसा कि अभी आप you're saying this all dream and we are कुछ है. So why our karmas get so serious that we get the results? We are just in a dream and we are doing whatever we are doing is all dream. It's all imagination. So each and every karma gets noticed and it gets the results. So if it's we are in a dream, we are unknowingly we are doing it, and we all in an imagination. Imagination है ना प्रभु जी सारा कुछ तो फिर. So फिर हमारे कर्म क्यों?
I'm not saying unknowingly we are doing this. It is our desire. See, if it is my desire to go and kill somebody, suppose. So the three modes of nature, they get activated. And then I do that karma. So who's going to get the reaction? Of course, now the reaction is also, it's very funny. I mean, if you look at it, body will get the reaction. If I kill somebody, I will be put in prison house. So who is put in the prison house? The body. Body has not done it. It's the soul who does it. But because of my consciousness that I am this body, when the body gets punished, the soul again thinks he is getting punished. Although the soul is Satchidanand. Because of our consciousness. That's where the whole problem is. And if our consciousness is pure, then I won't even be committing all those sinful activities. Problem is in the consciousness, or that's the imagination, or that has to be purified.
Prabhuji, just 2 lines. I think we are running out of time, but just a thought. Like last line you said, right? Purifying ourselves, and when we purify by chanting and hearing and listening and doing the kirtan, we will not get into those entanglements, the material entanglements and doing the sinful activity. I think we will get rid of it slowly, gradually. Eventually we'll get rid of it, and then I think we'll also have our control in our mind, because this is what I feel. I feel very strongly that the more we do this, chanting, hearing, kirtan, reading the books of Srila Prabhupada, and we can control it.
See, the mind is what? Mind, intelligence, false ego. It's a subtle material body. It's not spiritual. And so the spirit soul is above this. Spiritual power is more strong than material. So spirit soul should control the mind, not the other way around. Not just control the mind, even the desires which come through the mind should be controlled by the spirit soul, not we get controlled by the mind. But this is what happens, and slowly, when we make progress spiritually, even the desires can be controlled. That's what, we'll study is the symptoms of conditioned and liberated living entities. What are the symptoms? That is progress. That is how we make progress.
Prabhuji, Srila Prabhupada said very nicely, it's always a balancing situation. Anytime we can fall down and anytime we can lift ourselves. It's the way we live. It's the way we move ourselves towards the positive things or negative things.
Yep, but that's how we have to have good sadhana, good bhakti, so we don't, even if we fall down, it will be a temporary fall down, just okay, get up and start running again.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Praveen. Thank you all. You all have a safe and wonderful day.
Thank you,
Jai
Prabhuji.
Shri
Hare Krishna.
Hare
Jai
Krishna.
Srila Prabhupada.
Hare Krishna.